As the sun begins to rise over the high plains, the neighborhood of San Miguel is just starting to wake up.
That early on a Sunday morning in Colorado Springs, I mean, you're not going to find many cars on the road or people shopping or anything like that. It's a very quiet time.
Around 6:30 a.m., rancher Fred Howard pulls into an empty convenience store parking lot.
Fred Howard was a passerby and decided to buy a newspaper.
Sir, please help me. This lady needs help.
What happened?
The guy tells him, "Hey, help me out. Somebody is shot in there."
The cashier lies in a pool of blood. As Fred Howard is trying to help, he begins to feel that something is amiss.
What does he see? The same guy who lured him in there, pointing a gun at him. Then it dawns on you, oh, I just walked in on a robbery. This is somebody who is going to kill me.
Across town, a promising young detective is going over some casework with a fine-toothed comb.
At that particular time, I had been on the police department for exactly 4 years.
Detective Joe Kenda has recently been assigned to the burglary unit.
I wasn't comfortable there. I didn't like it. It didn't interest me. If I'm going to investigate serious crime, I want to investigate the most serious crime. What interested me was murder.
It wasn't easy to get a slot in major crimes back in those days. You had to work your way to it.
One doesn't go off the street and directly into homicide. So my plan was, I worked very hard to make certain that I was doing the right thing every day. I thought that that would get me noticed.
But so far, all Kenda's hard work and ambition has earned him is the animosity of a few veteran detectives.
I was one of the few, if not the first officer employed who was a college graduate. So I suffered the slings and arrows of my compatriots who referred to me as the college boy.
You're going to have to requalify the shooting course here, sir?
That's what I heard too.
Whoa, whoa, whoa. Are you old enough to drink coffee? College boy?
We could probably get you some chocolate milk in the back.
It'd be the constant reminder that I must be really smart because I went to college and they didn't go to college. And on. It would never stop. It was every day, which I assured them it was true, that I was in fact smarter than they were. So it was kind of a little game we played.
I can tell you from my experience as a young cadet and seeing the old timers, some of them are pretty intimidating. We had some pretty big old boys back in the day, and they were pretty gruff.
On this particular morning, the hazing is interrupted by the sergeant in charge of homicide.
Break's over, guys. Got a possible double on the west end. Need all the help we can get.
I'm available, sir.
Sure. Okay, Clemens, what you got?
Knowing it's unorthodox for a burglary detective to work a potential homicide, Kenda hangs back.
Sir, I got 2 victims inside shot. Female, she's shot in the head over right eye.
Okay.
The female victim is cashier Susan Irving. EMTs rush Susan to the hospital, where she is in critical condition.
And the male, he's shot in the chest and the head one time. He might make it.
Fred Howard, who came to the store to buy a newspaper, is also at the hospital, undergoing emergency surgery.
Very little money is taken.
Okay.
This is a robbery resulting in a shooting of 2 people who, in this case, were both eyewitnesses to who this robber was.
The robber's intent was to kill somebody or seriously injure them.
That is very, very different than what you normally see in armed robbery.
Open the register.
Okay.
Hurry up. Give me the money. Hurry up.
I'm so sorry. Please don't shoot me.
He is willing to resort to that level of violence over a very small amount of money. That's about as cold-blooded as it gets.
Kenda's itching to get a closer look at the crime scene, but the homicide sergeant has other plans.
You too. Inside. You got it. Y'all canvas out here. Kenda, go with these guys, see what you can find.
Yes, sir. Let me show you the crime scene.
I was assigned to the peripheries of the case, contacting other people that might live in the area, might have seen something. It was 6:30 on a Sunday morning. Most of them were either in bed or just gotten up.
And where do you live?
Just up here around the corner.
Did you happen to see anything today out of the ordinary?
No, sir.
Did you hear anything? Any gunshots, noises, yelling?
No, not really. Just all the commotion with the sirens.
No one had any knowledge. No one heard anything. Nobody saw anything. So I returned to the scene to tell someone that. My initial assignment met without result. And I was in the process of doing that right in front of the front doors of the 7-Eleven when one of the homicide detectives came outside and he opened the door. To me, at that moment, the open door was an invitation. And I started looking.
I knew Joe Kenda from the day he came on the job. Joe was a very astute individual. He was cerebral in the sense of being able to digest clues and evidence and to direct the focus of an investigation.
A lot of the food displays had been knocked over. The magazine rack was tipped over. Obviously, a physical confrontation and struggle took place in that area.
There seems to be zero evidence that will identify the shooter. Then, out of the corner of his eye, Kenda spots a potential clue.
I saw an identification bracelet with a linked chain laying on the floor of the store.
But no sooner has Kenda noted this evidence, he's taken to task by one of his superiors.
Kenda, what the hell are you doing? I'm just looking at the evidence. You know, with this bracelet here, we could probably...
Get your ass out here.
Yes, sir.
For Christ's sake. Damn college kid.
I don't think we're going to find anything in there. I think this is a random shooting.
Kenda can't help but overhear the veteran detectives discussing the case.
We could canvass for a quarter of a mile and not get anything. I don't think we're going to find anything.
Why don't we focus on some things that we can get done right now?
We need to move on to more important things.
And
hopefully something will come up eventually.
I listened to the older detectives assigned in homicide, who are all trying to convince each other that there's too much work involved in this. They're all saying, boy, we'll never get this one. This guy's a stranger to these people. He's not their husband or their boyfriend. He's a complete stranger. And I thought, how odd is that? That we're just going to give up?
There's always a scenario in cases where we talk about old guard or old timers being less than enthusiastic, and sometimes all it takes is somebody with some initiative, perhaps maybe a fresh perspective, that could make the difference in the case.
And at that moment, I thought that maybe this could be an opportunity for me by volunteering.
That's great.
Hey, Sarge, if nobody else wants this case, I'll take it.
Sounds like the college boy wants a little extra credit. Hey, give it to the frat boy. Give it. Fine with me.
Well, yeah, we have it solved before recess.
Absolutely.
Your sergeant doesn't have a problem with it. We're fine.
Thank you, sir.
Yes, sir.
Can I get a look at that bracelet?
Sure. Help yourself.
Boy, this is their opportunity. They've saddled the college boy with an insurmountable problem, and they are amused to no end.
Always thinks he's going to find there's nothing in there.
I didn't know what I could do. I wasn't supremely confident, but I knew I was certainly willing to try. And it was apparent to me that no one else was. You've dropped the gauntlet, and I just picked it up.
Rookie burglary detective Joe Kenda has volunteered for the first potential homicide case of his career.
Other detectives believed that there wasn't enough there to lead to the identification of a suspect. Everyone else is looking at me like I've lost my mind, and I was feeling wonderful. I had no idea if I was going to resolve this, but I was confident that I would die in the attempt if I didn't get it resolved.
The only evidence at Kenda's disposal is a bracelet the killer left behind.
I put it out on the deck of this police car, and I turned it over with a pen, and I see the name Ingrid. It's a girl's name.
They were not jewelry store type bracelets. They were just little ID bracelets that were popular at that time, and you would put somebody you cared about's name on it. It was just a thing that boyfriends and girlfriends would give each other.
That didn't seem promising to me, but it's still a link.
If the only piece of evidence you have at the scene of a robbery is an ID bracelet that's left behind, your chances of solving that case are probably pretty slim. Not impossible, but slim.
Kenda heads to the hospital to see if either victim is in any condition to talk. He starts with Susan Irving, the young convenience store cashier who was shot in the head.
Excuse me, doctor. I'm Detective Kenda.
Detective?
Do you know where I might be able to find gunshot victim Susan Irving?
She's heavily sedated right now.
Could I at least see her?
No, but I'll let you know when she comes to.
Thank you.
Hospital personnel's first concern is the health of the patient. Their last concern is the health of your investigation.
Unable to speak with his witness, Kenda reluctantly prepares to move on.
There was a time in my career when I didn't understand that if you look like you belong, everyone assumes you do.
Good morning, doctor.
I learned that here. I would just walk around hospitals like I worked there. I always wore a suit. I would never say I was a doctor, but of course I wouldn't correct them either.
Dr. Kenda finds Susan Irving's room.
I just walk in, and two nurses were there, and they looked at me, and they just sort of nodded, and I nodded back, and nothing was said. And they both got busy doing something.
Kenda is hoping Susan Irving can describe the shooter when she comes to. In the meantime, he reads up on her condition.
She has a gunshot wound of the head. She has edema of the brain. She's been sedated to try to reduce that pressure in the brain. So we're not going to interview Susan now or maybe ever. I was standing there wondering about what to do next. It scared me to death. So my first attempt at posing as a medical doctor went rather badly. I got better at it as time went on.
With Susan Irving off limits, Kenda hopes the second victim, Fred Howard, can identify the shooter.
Mr. Howard was, in fact, a native of the state of Colorado and had a lot of experience around ranches and ranch work, and he dresses the part. The surgeon there told me I had his permission to talk to him. He said he's under medication, so he may not be accurate in what he says to you, and he's in a great deal of pain.
Fred? I'm Detective Kenda.
Hi, Detective.
How you feeling?
I've been better.
It'd be really helpful if you could tell me everything you know about the shooting.
He said, so I went in, and a girl at the register is on her back, and there's blood everywhere.
So I knelt down. About that time, I hear this click behind me. And so I turn around and put my hands up. He shot in my finger.
And then he shot me again in the chest. And I knew if I didn't do something, he was going to kill me. And I grabbed his wrist, and I felt that bracelet, and I just jerked on it, and it came off.
What can you tell about the shooter?
Well, he's a young guy. Maybe a little shorter than me. White guy, I think.
You think he was white, or you're not positive?
I'm not really sure.
White male, 20 years old. Maybe, maybe not. But one thing we know for sure, he wears a bracelet with an M. Ingrid on it. That we know.
That was a brave thing you did. And I appreciate the time.
Sure, Detective.
Get better soon.
Thanks.
A robber willing to kill is walking the streets of Colorado Springs, and it's up to Kenda to find him. But that's beginning to look impossible.
Kenda, where's the suspect? You leave him in the damn car?
Are the victims still alive? They are, but neither one of them knows who the shooter is.
Other detectives believed, based on their experience, which is certainly more than I had, that there wasn't enough there to lead to the identification of a suspect.
Sounds like to me you're beating the damn dead horse. Maybe it's time to move on.
Kid, if the victims can't ID the guy, you got nothing. Nobody knows who the guy is. You can't expect to catch him with just a bracelet. Sometimes it happens this way. You can't solve them all.
They were right. They were right. I was extremely aware that my opportunities for resolving this were slowly circling the drain. This is a stranger upon stranger crime, the most difficult of all criminal investigations. But it never means it's impossible. It never means that. Because in order for it to be impossible, you have to surrender. And I was unwilling to surrender. We have two victims in this case that have been brutally attacked with gunfire during an armed robbery.
Now, it's up to newbie detective Joe Kenda to track down their attacker.
Susan was in a coma the last time I saw her. Mr. Howard was suffering the pain of a gunshot wound, the loss of a finger, and the trauma of surviving an event like that. I was going to find who did that to him. I was going to find who did that to Susan. And I was going to do something about it. The only thing I've got that might get me somewhere is a piece of junk jewelry.
Sometimes it takes a little more digging. Sometimes it takes a little more insight. Sometimes it takes working outside the box, and that's where your good detectives get results.
So, okay, our shooter is a guy. He's wearing a bracelet with a girl's name on it. That's his girlfriend, or at least someone that's close to him. I sat at my desk for hours one evening when everyone else went home, and I had the bracelet laying out on my desk. And I just kept looking at it, and I was hoping it was going to say something, but it never did. I'm looking again at the way it's engraved, and it looks odd to me. You look at this Ingrid, and it's double cut, which gives it kind of a 3D effect. Maybe there's a reason why it's different. I don't know what it is. I'm not a jeweler, but I know someone who is.
Hey, John.
Joe, how are you?
Good, how you doing?
Good to see you.
I was wondering if you could help me with something.
Sure.
We picked this up a robbery suspect. I was wondering if you'd seen anything like it before.
Oh, yeah, I've seen these.
How about the engraving on it? It's kind of unique.
Yeah, now the engraving, yeah, you're right. It's the double cut, the new Hermes system.
That was done with a new Hermes engraving machine. How do you know that? He said, I've got one. He said, they're the only machine that does the double cut.
Do you have the phone number for New Hermes?
Yeah, let me get it for you.
Armed with this information, Kenda calls New Hermes.
Yes, I'm trying to find out who in the Colorado Springs area uses your engravers.
They provide him with a list of every store in Colorado Springs that owns one of their engraving machines.
Thank you. Bye.
I've gone pretty far from staring at this thing on my desk, hoping it would speak to me, to 27 places where it was probably made.
Kenda sets out to visit each one of the 27 stores in hopes of finding out where the bracelet in question was engraved.
I start going to these places and ask them and show them the item, and do you ever do anything like this? And the answer is no, 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 no. We're looking at the engraving machines in the city of Colorado Springs, even though there's this little voice in your head that says, well, yeah, but what if it's Denver? It could be Denver, Kenda, you moron. It could be Pueblo. You don't want to think about that. You can't.
In an investigation, you have to be thorough, you have to be detailed, you have to be persistent, you have to be bulldogish about it.
So I am about halfway on my list of machines. And I go to a place, this little place was called the Can Do Shop.
I'm working on an investigation. Do you recall selling that?
Oh, yes, I remember that name. About 2 weeks ago, I think.
Can you tell me about the buyer?
Oh, a couple, a young white girl, black man.
And I'm thinking, black boyfriend? Mr. Howard said he's a white guy.
Are you sure he was black?
Oh, yes.
And she says, you know why I remember him? Why? He argued about the price. He thought it was too much. He was loud. He was profane. That guy was an asshole. And I thought, well, I'm certainly looking for one of those.
Kenda believes the gentleman the jeweler is describing is his shooter, despite the fact that her account of him differs from the one given by Fred Howard.
It's not uncommon for people to make mistakes about what they remember. They're trying to remember something that was so traumatic that the only thing they can think about is the pain and the gunfire.
Now, who paid for it?
She did.
Did you happen to write down her name and address?
Oh, yes, we have receipts. Would you like to see that?
Please.
This being 1977, most small businesses would have those pads that had the carbon copy in between them.
Kenda hopes finding the right receipt will lead him to the shooter. But when the clerk hands him the first of several shoeboxes full of paperwork, he realizes it's a job easier said than done.
It was like 700 receipts.
You sure it's in there?
Absolutely.
With both Susan Irving and Fred Howard fighting for their lives, Kenda struggles to bring them justice.
So we found the needle in this haystack. We found the machine. Now we need to get into another haystack and find another needle.
For exclusive footage, go to investigationdiscovery.com. Detective Joe Kenda is working his first potential homicide and is on the hunt for a violent armed robber who shot down 2 innocent people at point-blank range.
Mr. Howard wound up shot because he wanted to buy a Sunday paper. Miss Irving got shot because she went to work. Is there any behavior on the part of either one of those victims that allowed them to be a victim that morning? Absolutely not.
Kenda's only clue, a bracelet with the name Ingrid engraved on it, has led him to a local jewelry store. If Kenda can find the receipt, he hopes it will lead him to Ingrid's boyfriend, the shooter.
I sat there for a couple of hours, reading receipts, taking from the box, read it, set it aside, so on and so on. I find it. The name Ingrid and an address on the west side. I had to assume that she's making this for the guy that's with her. So I go back to the police department and I get in their records department. I had one of the techs pull every incident of any kind that happened in the 100 block of where this girl lives. Wrecks, shots fired, domestic violence complaints, anything that might lead me to who this guy is. Anything. I didn't care what it was. I was in there for 2 days. I couldn't find anything that linked a guy to anything in that 100 block. Until the afternoon of the second day, and I find a parking ticket issued for wrong side to curb directly in front of her house, not somebody else's house, hers. His name is Fred Henry Swain. He is a black male. He is 21 years of age.
Is this the suspect Kenda's been searching for? Right now, Fred Swain is simply a name, nothing else.
So I go into the criminal records area.
Swain.
Right here, sir. I got it.
Oh, great.
There you go.
I'll bring it back.
Yes, sir.
He's got a record as long as your arm for assault with a deadly weapon, for armed robbery, for possession of a firearm by a previous offender, and on and on.
Fred Swain's lengthy rap sheet isn't the only thing about him that fits the profile.
He lives at 1210 Potter Drive. That is 3 blocks from the convenience store at San Miguel and Academy. 3 blocks. It's very common for robbers to rob where they live.
They can work in their own neighborhoods because they're familiar with the area.
He's my guy. He is my guy.
Kenda draws up an affidavit for an arrest warrant, but he's worried that the lack of physical evidence might prevent the judge from signing off on it.
It's my first time in the deep end of the pool, and I'm not going to drown. So I literally describe nit by nit, second by second, how I got to where I was.
The fate of the investigation lies with the district court judge.
Your Honor, I have an arrest affidavit for you to review.
And it was 17 pages long. The judge even raised his eyebrows when I handed it to him because it weighed about a pound.
The police officers have to present to a judge sufficient information that builds to probable cause. At that point, the judge examines all of the facts. If that's sufficient, then an arrest warrant is issued.
I felt my career hinged on this piece of paper. My heart is going like a trip hammer. I know that this is the guy. Can I convince a district court judge that I'm right, being the arrogant, foolish kid that I am?
Good job, Detective.
Thank you, sir. Thank you.
I didn't walk out of his office. I floated. I thought I had just become Sherlock Holmes.
Now Kenda has all he needs to tighten the noose.
I believe that my shoes are covered in gum. I must be a gumshoe detective. But I'm pretty good at it because I know who he is. He doesn't know who I am yet, but he's about to find out.
Well, this guy's a shooter, so we don't want to take him in the house. I'm afraid he might barricade himself in.
Right.
And I'm pretty sure he needs to come from behind us to get in here. So if you want to go down around the corner and hide so he doesn't see the marked car.
It's just going to be you and your partner trying to take this guy down. You're going to try and take him down in the situation where he's got the least likelihood of being able to get away.
Kenda and the officer stake out Fred Swain's apartment.
The officer is sitting between two buildings, relatively out of sight. And I'm parked at the end of the block, and I'm watching my mirror to see the approaches on the street behind me.
After several hours, Kenda's hopes are sinking, when suddenly,
here comes our man Fred, driving his car.
So all of a sudden, it's a scramble. It's going from 0 to 100 in 0.2 seconds.
Out of the car!
I knew that Fred had a gun. I knew he wasn't afraid to use it. But I had a gun, and I wasn't afraid to use mine either.
Detective Joe Kenda is lying in wait for Fred Swain, the prime suspect in a ruthless double shooting.
I think he'll barricade if we try to confront him at home. So let's take him in the car. The principle is overwhelming force.
Out of the car! Out of the car!
And I rolled out in front of him and blocked him. You want to convince this person in a microsecond that there's no escape. And if escape is attempted, gunfire is going to result. He has a gun in front of him and a gun behind him. If he's armed, he's going to have to be an acrobat if he's going to shoot his way out of this.
Put your hands on your head! Do what he says!
As Kenda tightens the cuffs, he realizes he has an audience.
I was getting followed around by the press, probably because somebody told them that this college boy had this case. Well, the press that had been following me took a picture of that. And it was half of the front page of the newspaper. Police arrest shooter in convenience store robbery. This was now day 5 since this incident occurred, and I have my guy, the guy they said I would never find.
With veteran homicide detectives looking on, Kenda leads Fred Swain into an interrogation room.
Other hand. Have a seat. Fred, why don't you tell me what happened at the convenience store?
I don't have anything to say to you.
Are you sure that's the way you want to go?
Okay, Fred. Good. Remain silent. But don't forget you do need an attorney, by the way. And in fact, in your case, my boy, you might need 2 of them.
Even without a confession, Kenda has a pretty good idea how the crime went down.
He selects a place where nobody's around. It's 6:30 in the morning. The only thing that's around is the money he wants and 1 clerk to overcome.
Open the register.
Okay.
Hurry up.
Okay.
Hurry up. Hurry up. Give me the money.
I'm so sorry. Please don't shoot me. Please don't shoot me. Please. Please. Please don't shoot me. Please.
Now, what prompted him to shoot this girl, I don't know. It is possible that he walked in there intending there not to be any witnesses to this crime. He'd been in prison before, maybe he didn't want to go back.
On his way out, Fred Swain notices Fred Howard approaching.
He has seen him, or he might see him. So his plan is to shoot him too. That's about as cold-blooded as it gets.
Sir, please, help me. What? Sir, I need some help.
What?
So he entices this man to come inside so he can shoot him.
Oh my God, call 911.
He fails to kill him. And he loses something in the process of that I find, that I'm able to stick down his throat.
But Kenda will need more than a charm bracelet in order to make the charges stick. So as Fred Swain is carted off to county lockup, Kenda obtains a search warrant for his apartment.
There's dirty clothes everywhere. There's empty food containers everywhere. The place is filthy.
I'll start down here. All right, I'll go upstairs.
We conducted a search at his apartment. We find a pistol in his bedroom nightstand. Our ballistics people examine a bullet they have that they've recovered from Mr. Howard's chest, and they determine without question this is the weapon used in this crime.
But what about Fred Swain's girlfriend, Ingrid?
I did speak to her. She had no knowledge of the event. She had no knowledge.
In the following weeks, victims Fred Howard and Susan Irving are both on the road to recovery.
To have both of them survive and just go on, I mean, it's like getting hit by lightning. They are the luckiest people in the world, and I hope that they've had long, happy lives.
Instead of murder, Fred Swain is convicted of armed robbery and 2 counts of first-degree assault. But the presiding judge doesn't let him get off easy.
The judge in the case, who was, in my opinion, one of the best judges on the bench at the time, was so offended by the behavior of this individual that he sentenced him in such a way that Mr. Swain will never get out of jail.
The thing that struck me is that he intended to, I think, make sure there were no witnesses left to this crime. The ultimate sentence was 60 to 98 years in the penitentiary.
As for Kenda, his tenacity doesn't go unnoticed. After solving the case, he is officially transferred to the homicide unit.
Initially, I was frightened that I had a big mouth, and started myself down a path maybe I couldn't recover from. But it's the chance I took.
He had innate talent for that work. He was the right guy for homicide.
Great job for a college boy.
There were many people that did come up to me and say, that was quite a piece of work. And that was nice. It was nice. It made me feel good. But doing it is what made me feel good. At the time I took this case on, I was being an arrogant, silly kid who was in a get even with those guys that were teasing me. But as it proceeded, I lost all interest in that, and I became focused on the victims of the crime and finding someone responsible. And it was a euphoric feeling when I did find them. And I believed after that case that I was on a mission for the rest of my life, that this is what I was going to do.
Toronto, 2014, cold case solved, the headline screamed, and for one breathless hour the city believed it, the kind of belief that makes strangers stop mid-sidewalk and look up at the glass towers like the answer might be written in the sky, the kind that makes radio sound like sirens even when they are playing morning traffic, the kind that makes you think the nightmare has an ending until the story collapses under its own weight and leaves only the echo, louder than before, because what's worse than a mystery is a mystery that pretends it's been put to bed. The message arrived like a punch through a screen, arrest imminent. Breakthrough. Name withheld. The words traveled faster than the streetcars, faster than the winter wind off the lake, faster than fear itself. And then, just as quickly, silence. No press conference. No handcuffs. No mugshot. No closure. Only a city with its hands hovering over a wound it never stopped touching, waiting for the scab to form, and feeling it split open again. The neighborhood where it began didn't look like the kind of place that breeds legends. Not the neon-lit underworld of crime dramas, not the deserted backwoods of a horror film. It was ordinary Toronto, brick houses with tired porches, narrow streets where parked cars shoulder each other, a convenience store that always smelled faintly of coffee and lottery tickets, a bus stop with a schedule that felt like a suggestion. On paper it was safe. On a map it was forgettable. But that's how it works, isn't it? The cases that poison a city don't announce themselves with thunder. They slip into the cracks of daily life and expand until the cracks become the whole wall. She was 26. People always say that first, as if the number can hold her in place, as if age can pin a ghost to a calendar. 26, a shift worker, a sister, a daughter, someone who laughed loud enough to be heard over a crowded kitchen, someone who kept a spare phone charger in her purse because she hated being unreachable. She lived with routines the way most of us do, keys in the same pocket, coffee the same way, playlists to match the mood of the sky, and those routines are the last thing investigators can cling to when the person is gone, because routines are evidence that life made sense until it didn't. On the night she vanished, Toronto was doing what it always does, moving. Trains sighed under the city, elevators swallowed bodies and spat them out on other floors, headlights stitched white threads through the dark. She clocked out later than expected. A co-worker remembered the fluorescent hum of the break room, the way she rolled her shoulders like the hours had left fingerprints on her skin. She texted someone, one line, nothing dramatic, the kind of message you send when you think tomorrow is guaranteed. She stepped outside. She became a small shape in a big city. And then the city did what it does best. It swallowed her whole. At first, it didn't feel like a case. It felt like a delay. A missed bus. A dead phone. A night spent at a friend's place, a spontaneous decision, a bad habit of forgetting to check in. The family called around, got the same answers, haven't seen her. Not tonight. Maybe she crashed. They waited for the familiar vibration of a text that would make the panic feel silly. but the hours stacked up like bricks. Morning came. Then afternoon. The phone went straight to voicemail, a calm automated voice that sounded obscene against the rising dread. Someone drove her usual route and felt the skin on their arms lift as if the air itself was warning them. No one wants to be the first to say it out loud, because the moment you say it, you can't say it. Missing. Toronto police took the report the way they take thousands, with forms, with protocols, with measured voices trained to sound steady around hysteria. But there was a detail, there's always a detail, that made the room shift. A witness, maybe. A strange car. A shout heard too late. A camera pointed in the wrong direction. It doesn't take much. One wrong angle, one blind spot, and a person becomes a question mark. They pulled call logs. They pinged cell towers. They traced the last known coordinates like hunters following a fading footprint in snow. They knocked on doors where people blinked and shrugged, where curtains twitched and then fell still. They asked transit operators, taxi drivers, bar staff, anyone whose job put them in contact with the moving bloodstream of the city. They fed her photo into the machine of public awareness, posters on poles, bulletins on screens, a face frozen in a smile that now felt like a challenge. Have you seen her? No? Not yet. Not anymore. In the early days, hope behaves like adrenaline. It keeps people upright. It makes them talk too fast, work too hard, drive too far. Volunteers walked ravines and parks, boots sinking into slush, calling her name until their throats ached. Friends combed social media, analyzing every tag, every like, every absence. Her family sat by the phone like it was a heart monitor, watching for the pulse. And the city watched too, because Toronto loves a story with a clean ending. Find the missing woman. Bring her home. Cue the tears. Cue the relief. Cue the lesson about community and vigilance. But this story didn't care what the city wanted. Weeks later, the case acquired its first scar, the kind that changes the way everyone speaks. Not a confession, not a suspect, not a dramatic discovery, something smaller, colder. An item. A trace. A fragment of normal life torn away from its owner and left somewhere it didn't belong. A bag, a piece of clothing, a personal effect. The detail leaked, as they always do, and it hit the public like a slap. She had been here, and then she wasn't. The location didn't match the story anyone wanted to tell. It wasn't on her route. It wasn't near the places she loved. It felt staged, like someone had tried to place the evidence where it would be found, where it would speak for them, where it would mislead. Then came the footage. Grainy, indifferent, the black and white eyes of a camera that never blinks but rarely sees. One clip showed a figure that might be her, might be anyone, passing through a pool of light and dissolving into shadow. Another captured a vehicle creeping at the edge of the frame, too slow to be casual, too deliberate to be nothing. The investigators watched these loops until they could see them with their eyes closed. The public watched them too, slowing them down, zooming in, drawing circles, turning pixels into prophecy. Someone said they saw a limp. Someone said they saw a second person. Someone said they recognized the car. A dozen tips came in. Then 100. Then 1,000. Most went nowhere. A few led into alleys of confusion so tight the case could barely fit. And then, the rumor that would haunt the next decade began to take shape. The voicemail. It started as a whisper in a newsroom, a half-formed statement traded over coffee and deadlines. There's a message. A recording. It's strange. Police didn't confirm it. They didn't deny it either, and in the vacuum, the rumor grew teeth. The story said she had left a voicemail hours after she was supposed to be gone, one that sounded unlike her, one that had background noise like wind or traffic or a television, one that included a breathless pause, a muffled word, a sound that made listeners argue, was that fear, or was that nothing at all? Some said the message wasn't meant for anyone. Some said it was accidental, a pocket dial that caught the soundtrack of her last moments. Others insisted it was a cry for help hidden in plain sight, a coded plea, a last breadcrumb dropped before the dark closed in. Families learn a special kind of suffering in cases like this. You're not just grieving, you're negotiating with uncertainty. Every rumor is a needle. Every headline is a hand reaching into your chest. Every time the phone rings, your body thinks it's salvation and disaster at the same time. They held vigils where candles flickered against the winter air, small flames defying the city's indifferent wind. They begged for tips. They offered rewards. They stood in front of microphones and asked strangers to care. Toronto listened, then looked away, then listened again, because the case wouldn't go quietly. It had the shape of a question that refused to be answered. The investigation broadened the way they always do when the narrow path ends. Detectives checked her relationships, her finances, her online life. They reconstructed days, then weeks, then months, drawing timelines like spiderwebs, each strand a possibility. They interviewed former partners, co-workers, friends of friends whose names were pulled from contact lists like bones from dirt. They asked about arguments, about debts, about secrets. They examined the city itself as a suspect, its transit corridors, its dead zones, its places where light doesn't reach. The lake, the ravines, the construction sites with their temporary walls and easy hiding places. Toronto is beautiful, but it has teeth. It has places that look harmless until you're alone in them. And then, the first major lead arrived dressed like certainty. A man was brought in for questioning. Not officially named. Not officially linked. But the story spread anyway, a person of interest, someone with a history, someone seen near the area. For a moment, the case felt like it had a direction. Social media did what it does, turned speculation into accusation, turned vague descriptions into targets. People wanted a villain. They always do. Because if there's a villain, there's an ending. The man was released. The lead dried up. The crowd moved on to the next shadow. The case remained, unblinking. Years have a way of sanding down outrage. Posters fade. Phone lines quiet. Friends get married, move away, change jobs, change lives. The missing person remains the same age forever. 26. Always 26. Always mid-step. Always the last photo on the last day anyone knew. But the family does not get sanded down. They become sharper, more brittle, more determined. They learn legal language. They learn how to speak to reporters without collapsing. They learn the names of detectives, the shift changes, the bureaucratic gears that grind even in tragedy. They push, because if they stop pushing, the world will stop caring. And the world will always choose comfort if you let it. In 2017, something happened that made the city inhale again. The unit handling the case changed hands. New eyes. New technology. Old evidence pulled from boxes that smelled like paper and time. Forensics had advanced. Databases had grown. Patterns could be seen now that weren't visible then. They reran samples. They re-interviewed witnesses. They re-examined video with tools that could sharpen a smudge into a silhouette. The public heard, reviewed, and tasted hope, bitter and familiar. In 2020, another jolt, an anonymous tip, the kind that arrives like a letter slid under a door at midnight. It named a location. It named a name. It claimed knowledge of what happened and why the case had stayed quiet for so long. Police searched. They didn't find what they needed. They didn't say what they did find. The rumor mill did the rest. People pointed at maps. People posted coordinates. People argued in comment sections as if arguing could bring her back. Then came 2024, and the headline that lit the fuse all over again, cold case solved. It broke in the early hours, when the city was still half asleep and most lies have the advantage. A local outlet reported, sources close to the investigation had confirmed a long-awaited breakthrough. A suspect identified. Charges pending. An announcement expected. The story spread like wildfire, and for a moment you could feel Toronto collectively lean toward the idea of closure, hungry for it, desperate for it, as if the mere shape of an ending could heal the years. The family received calls from relatives they hadn't heard from in months. Friends who had learned not to hope too hard felt the old ache flare. People who had never met her but had carried her face in the corner of their minds felt something loosen in their chest. Finally, they thought. Finally. And then, nothing. No confirmation. No arrest. No briefing. The official channel stayed quiet, and the silence did not feel like strategy, it felt like absence. Reporters called spokespeople. Spokespeople said they couldn't comment. Detectives said the case remained active. We are following leads. We asked the public for patience. Patience. The word landed like an insult, because patience is what you ask for when you have time, and missing persons cases are made of stolen time. The headline began to rot in real time. Solved became close to solved. Arrest imminent became investigation ongoing. The public, embarrassed and angry, did what crowds do, they looked for someone to blame. The media. The police. The family. The missing woman herself, because cruelty always finds a way in when people are uncomfortable with uncertainty. But the family didn't have the luxury of being embarrassed. For them, the fake ending was its own kind of violence. It dragged them to the edge of closure and pushed them back into the dark. It reminded them that the case had become a story that other people could use, clicks, ratings, dinner table talk, while they remain trapped inside it, living in a loop where every promise is temporary. Toronto still carries the case like a bruise under clothing. Mention her name in certain circles and you'll see the reaction, the eyes that shift away, the jaw that tightens, the quick inhale. People remember where they were when they heard. People remember the first time they saw the poster. People remember the rumor about the voicemail, about the vehicle, about the item found out of place. And somewhere in the city, the person who knows what happened, whether it's a stranger, a friend, a witness, a perpetrator, walks through the same streets, rides the same trains, hears the same headlines, and feels nothing or feels everything. That's the horror that clings to unsolved cases. The suspect isn't a monster in a cave. The suspect might be a silhouette in a crowd. A familiar face behind a steering wheel. Someone who smiles at a cashier. Someone who tells themselves the city forgot. But Toronto didn't forget. The city only learned how to live with the question. And questions don't die. They wait. They curl up in the corners of memory. They hide in the static between radio stations, in the glow of streetlights on wet asphalt, in the hollow sound of footsteps in an empty stairwell. They wait for one voice, one detail, one slip, one name to be spoken too confidently, one, solved, that turns out to be a lie, because the lie itself becomes part of the case, another clue about how badly someone wants the truth buried. And if that headline was wrong, if the case was not solved, then why did it surface now, with such certainty, with such timing, with such cruel precision? Who wanted Toronto to believe it was over, and what were they trying to outrun? The truth about headlines is they don't just report reality, they manufacture gravity, and that, solved, headline didn't fade like a mistake, it sank into the city's bloodstream and sat there, heavy, unnatural, like a bullet that never got removed, because once you say a case is finished you force everyone to look at the unfinished parts with new suspicion, you force the question to sharpen, you force the silence to sound like a decision instead of a failure, and Toronto is a city that understands decisions made in silence, deals done behind tinted glass, names exchanged in corridors where cameras don't reach, so when the official channel stayed quiet the street started talking louder, not in one voice but in 1,000 overlapping murmurs, each one sure it had the missing piece, each one ready to set the whole story on fire to see what crawled out. It began with the voicemail again, because mysteries always return to the one artifact that feels alive, the one thing that still carries breath, and in this case the rumor had matured into folklore, a message left hours after she disappeared, a sliver of sound that nobody outside the investigation had heard but everybody had an opinion on, and in barbershops and break rooms and comment threads people described it like they'd played it on repeat. They swore the background noise was water, no traffic, no music, no a television playing an old crime show. They insisted they heard a man's voice, or two, or none at all. They claimed she said a word that sounded like a name, or a street, or a plea, and the more the police refused to confirm it the more the public treated the refusal as confirmation, because in the modern world silence is interpreted as guilt, and Toronto's silence had been going on for years. In the file, the voicemail wasn't a myth, it was a timestamp, a technical fact that could be measured, dissected, weaponized, and the investigators who reopened the evidence weren't listening for drama, they were listening for physics, the frequency hum of a power line, the distinct rhythm of a subway announcement, the acoustic signature of a stairwell versus a car interior, the way a voice changes when it's pressed against fabric, the tiny electronic fingerprints left by compression and transmission, because every recording is also a map if you know how to read the noise, and in 2014 those tools weren't what they became later, but time has a way of turning old artifacts into new opportunities, and that's what made the 2024 headline so dangerous. It implied something in that map had finally been deciphered. The family felt it first as a shift in how people treated them, the tone in calls, the way acquaintances suddenly asked questions that sounded like congratulations, the subtle pressure to perform relief, to smile for the cameras that never arrived, and there's a cruelty in that, unique cruelty, because when a case is unsolved the world allows you to grieve publicly, but when the world thinks it's solved it expects you to wrap your grief neatly, fold it away, say thank you, move on, and if you can't, you become inconvenient, you become the person who won't stop talking about a story everybody wants to end. Behind that pressure was the machine of investigation, grinding, methodical, secretive, and at the center of it all was a box that had been opened and closed so many times it looked tired, evidence bags, paper reports, timelines, witness statements, photographs that had been handled with gloves and now had the sterile smell of sealed plastic, and one by one the items were pulled back into light, not for the public, not for closure, but because cold cases are never truly frozen, they are just waiting for the world to change enough that the truth can finally stick. They started with the last known route, because the city is a maze and every maze has a logic, and the logic is easier to see if you rebuild it from scratch. She left work late. She was seen at a stop, maybe. There was a camera that caught a figure, maybe. A gap in time that widened into a canyon. The investigators drew the canyon again and again, looking for what could fit inside it, a ride offered, confrontation, an accidental encounter that turned predatory, a moment of vulnerability that lasted seconds and caused years of fallout. They looked at the geography of Toronto with the eyes of someone who doesn't live here, because familiarity dulls danger, and strangers see the corners you stop noticing, the poorly lit stretch under an overpass, the alley that cuts between buildings like a throat, the parking lot where a car can idle unseen, the ravine paths that are beautiful by day and hungry by night. And then they looked at people, because places don't move bodies, people do, and in the years since 2014 the list of people connected to her had grown in strange ways, co-workers who had changed names and countries, acquaintances who had been arrested for unrelated crimes, former partners whose lives had splintered, witnesses whose memories had warped, and every one of them was now older, more practiced at hiding, more likely to have forgotten small details that used to be sharp. Detectives learned early that memories don't fade like photographs, they mutate, they fill in blanks with imagination, they borrow from rumors, they reshape themselves to protect the person holding them, and yet sometimes the mutation reveals something the original didn't, because years later people confess without realizing they are confessing, they tell a story and include a detail that never mattered until now. That's where the 2024 spike began, not in a single dramatic confession, but in a slow accumulation of inconsistencies. A witness who had once said the street was empty now remembered headlights. Someone who had claimed she walked alone now mentioned a second figure at the edge of their vision. A co-worker who had sworn she left immediately after her shift now recalled a brief conversation by the lockers, a request for a ride, hesitation. Small things, but cold cases are built from small things, because the big things are missing by definition. And then there was the vehicle again, the phantom car that had haunted the footage like a shark fin slicing through pixels. In 2014, thousands of cars could match a vague description. In 2024, the pool could be narrowed with databases, with registration patterns, with collision reports, with the kind of data that turns a city into a spreadsheet. Vehicles change hands, they get scrapped, they get sold, they disappear into rural roads, but they leave trails, service records, insurance claims, traffic citations, toll readings, parking tickets, the mundane bureaucracy of modern life that criminals often forget is more relentless than police. A car can be a suspect even when the driver is unknown. That was one thread. Another thread was DNA, because DNA is the closest thing we have to time travel, a way to reach backward from the present and grab the hand of the past. In 2014, if they had a sample, it might have been too small, too degraded, too mixed. In later years, labs learned how to tease signal from noise, how to isolate fragments, how to compare to broader databases, how to produce a profile from what used to be considered useless. If a hair had been dismissed, it could now speak. If a touch sample had been ignored, it could now name. And if the case had truly flirted with being solved, it likely meant something in the evidence finally produced a profile that could be compared against the living world. But the living world has secrets too, and not every profile matches cleanly. Sometimes it points not to a person but to a family line, a cluster of relatives, a shadow of a name, and that's where investigations become delicate, because one wrong move and the person you're looking for vanishes again, not from the world, but into the cracks of the law. The public wants a face. The police want a conviction that won't collapse. The two desires rarely align. The rumor mill, of course, had no patience for that nuance. After the solved headline, the city went hunting for the suspect the way people hunt for a celebrity sighting, scanning every report for clues, turning ordinary men into villains with a single screenshot. A name surfaced, unverified, repeated like a curse, attached to a blurred photo and a claim that he'd left the province. Others said he'd been in jail. Others said he'd died. Every version of the rumor had the same purpose, to make the unknown feel containable. If the suspect is gone, the danger is gone. If the suspect is dead, the fear is done. But fear doesn't care about logic. Fear cares about proximity, and the idea that the person responsible might still be in Toronto was the kind of thought that made people check locks twice. The family received anonymous messages too, the kind that arrive at 2 a.m. and make your stomach drop before you even read them. Some were cruel. Some were false hope. Some were detailed enough to feel like they came from someone who knew too much. The investigators called them noise, but families know that noise can hide a signal, and every time they showed the messages to police they watched the faces on the other side of the desk for any twitch, any sign that one of them mattered more than the rest. There was one message, never publicly acknowledged, that allegedly referenced a location with unsettling specificity, a stretch near the water, a service road, a place that sounded too ordinary to be important until you realized ordinary places are where people hide extraordinary crimes. Searches were conducted quietly, not with the loud spectacle of tape and helicopters, but with discreet teams and careful legal steps, because if you tip off the wrong person you lose them forever. Nothing definitive was found. Or something was found and it was kept under seal. In unsolved cases, the line between those two possibilities is razor thin, and that razor cuts everyone who tries to lean in. Meanwhile, Toronto kept moving, because cities don't stop for grief, and that movement is its own kind of horror. A missing woman becomes a story told over the hum of espresso machines, over the rattle of subway cars, over the glow of condo lights at midnight. People look at the ravines and think of bodies. People look at black sedans and think of abductions. Parents tighten their grip on children's hands. Young women share rides home, share locations, share warning texts that begin with the same words, "Be careful." The case becomes a cautionary tale, not because anyone knows what happened, but because not knowing is worse. It means any version could be true. And still, the authorities stayed cautious, because caution is the tax you pay when you've been wrong before. In the years since 2014, they had chased leads that turned to smoke. They had interviewed suspects who later proved unrelated. They had watched the public tear apart innocent people over rumors. They knew that in a case like this, announcing a breakthrough too soon isn't just embarrassing, it's catastrophic. It poisons jury pools, it alerts perpetrators, it destroys trust that is already fragile. So they moved in shadows, and those shadows gave the headline room to breed. The most unsettling possibility was that the headline wasn't entirely false. That it was based on something real, something close enough to truth to feel inevitable, but not solid enough to stand in court. A partial match. A confession that couldn't be corroborated. A witness who finally spoke but demanded protection. A suspect who lawyered up and disappeared behind rights the moment pressure touched them. In that scenario, solved becomes a fantasy word for the public, while inside the investigation the truth remains a locked door with the key just out of reach. And locked doors have a way of producing desperate attempts to force them open, which is how you get leaks, and leaks are never clean. They come from people with agendas, someone who wants credit, someone who wants attention, someone who wants to pressure a suspect, someone who wants to test public reaction, someone who wants to scare the person responsible into making a mistake. If the solved headline was a leak, it wasn't just a mistake, it was a weapon. And the question becomes, who fired it, and at what target? Because after that headline, something changed. The calls to tip lines spiked again. Old witnesses resurfaced. People who had gone silent for years suddenly wanted to talk, not because they remembered more, but because the possibility of an ending changed the cost of speaking. When a case feels hopeless, witnesses protect themselves by staying quiet. When a case feels close, the calculus shifts. Some people want to be on the right side of history. Some people want reward money. Some people want to stop looking over their shoulder. And sometimes, just sometimes, someone who has carried guilt like a stone finally cracks under the weight of time. In the weeks that followed, detectives revisited a man who had been on the periphery since the beginning, a person whose name had appeared and disappeared in the file like a tide mark. Not the obvious villain. Not the loud suspect with a record and a reputation. Someone more dangerous, the kind of person who blends in, who has a job, who has a routine, who can explain their whereabouts with plausible calm. The kind of person who makes you realize predators don't always look like predators. They look like neighbors. They didn't arrest him. Not publicly. But they talked to him. They collected something, DNA, perhaps, or a phone, or a computer, or a sample of dirt from a trunk, because modern investigations aren't just interviews, they are data extractions, the forensic strip mining of a life. People think privacy is what they hide. Investigators know privacy is what you forget to hide, the locations saved in apps, the messages you deleted but didn't truly erase, the photos you never shared, the searches you typed at 3 a.m. when anxiety made you careless. If the case was moving, it was moving through those veins of data. And somewhere in Toronto, the family kept waking up to the same nightmare, not in sleep but in daylight, the idea that the truth was close enough to touch, and yet still not close enough to end the waiting. Because waiting is not passive in these cases. Waiting is active suffering. Waiting is a constant negotiation with the worst possible images your mind can generate. Waiting is looking at every unknown number on your phone and wondering if it's a confession or a prank. Waiting is seeing a woman with similar hair on a streetcar and feeling your heart riot in your chest, only to watch the doors close and the chance vanish again. The city wants a clean ending, but clean endings are rare, and Toronto, 2014, this case, had become a living thing, an organism that adapted to every attempt to pin it down. Each new tool, each new lead, each new headline didn't kill the mystery, it only forced it to evolve, to hide deeper, to find new ways to survive. And the most terrifying thought is that it survived because someone wanted it to, someone with enough control, enough caution, enough luck to keep the truth from surfacing, because in a city full of cameras and records and digital trails, staying invisible isn't an accident, it's a skill, it's a choice, it's a plan, and that plan, whatever it was, had already outlasted a decade. By the time winter returned, the kind of winter that turns Toronto's sidewalks into glass and makes every breath look like smoke, the case had collected a new layer of fear not just of what happened, but of what almost happened in 2024, that flash of certainty, that false, solved, because it proved something else, someone, somewhere, could move the story without moving the truth, could trigger a citywide reaction with a few words, could make hope surge and then collapse, and that kind of power doesn't come from nowhere, it comes from access, from proximity, from a hand that knows where the levers are. And once you realize the levers exist, you start staring at every quiet door like it might open into a room where the whole city is being watched. Inside the investigation, there was a phrase detectives hated but couldn't avoid, the window. The window was the stretch of time between her last confirmed sighting and the first moment the world noticed she was missing, that narrow corridor where anything could have happened and no one was looking yet, the moment predators love because it's clean and unobserved and full of plausible explanations. They widened the window with every new piece of data, peeled it back in layers, cell tower pings, transit logs, card swipes, camera angles, witness statements, until the corridor became a blueprint, and blueprints reveal something you can't see from the street, not just where she might have gone, but where she could not have gone without being seen, and that difference, that negative space, was where the case truly lived. They pulled the old phone records again, not just the calls and texts, but the metadata, the invisible fingerprints, which towers, which handoffs, which moments of connection and which moments of silence. There was a gap that had always bothered them, a brief drop into darkness that might have been a dead battery or a disabled phone or a deliberate act. In 2014, that gap was a frustrating hole. In 2025, it was a signal, because the absence of data is itself data. Phones don't disappear randomly. Not in a world built on constant connectivity. They disappear when something interrupts the routine, an accident, a panic, a hand reaching into a pocket that doesn't belong to it. The voicemail, if it existed the way the rumor insisted, sat in the middle of that darkness like a lit match. A message in a time where there shouldn't have been one. A breath in a room that should have been empty. The audio techs who listened to it did not listen like civilians. They listened like scientists. They measured the background hiss, the faint electrical whine, the rhythm of distant sounds. They compared it to known environments, the acoustics under an overpass, the cavernous reverb of a parking garage, the damp muffled air of a vehicle with windows up. They searched for signatures, an elevator chime, a crosswalk signal, a streetcar bell, those tiny, mundane sounds that could place someone more accurately than any witness who swears they are sure. And what they found, at least according to the whispers that leaked out later, wasn't a streetcar bell or a subway announcement. It was something older, rougher. Wind. Open space. A vibration that suggested proximity to a major roadway. And underneath it, so faint it could have been imagination, a second voice that was not hers. That second voice became the new obsession, because a second voice turns a disappearance into an encounter. It turns lost into taken. It turns a city's anxiety into a target. But the voice was too degraded to identify. No clear words, only tones. A shape behind fog. And shapes behind fog are dangerous, because people will fill them with whatever scares them most. The detectives didn't have the luxury of fear. They had process. They had to turn fog into something a court would accept. So they chased what courts love, patterns. They studied similar cases across Ontario and beyond, looking for behavioral repeats, late-night disappearances, lone commuters, evidence placed too neatly, vehicles lingering at the edge of surveillance. They searched for offenders who escalated, who moved, who changed methods but kept certain habits. They looked for what criminologists call a signature, the part of an act that isn't necessary for the crime but necessary for the person committing it. The public thinks criminals are impulsive. Investigators know the frightening ones are ritualistic. And then a pattern surfaced that made the room go quiet. Not a perfect match, not a neat series, but an unsettling overlap, a handful of reports from the same era, the same rough geography, the same time window, women describing a car that slowed beside them, a driver who asked questions that sounded harmless until they didn't, an insistence on offering a ride, a tone that switched from friendly to cold when refused. Most of these reports had been filed and forgotten, swallowed by the system's daily noise. Alone, each was a shrug. Together, they were a pulse. The car in those reports was described differently each time, color shifting like memory does, model guessed, plate unknown, but the behavior was consistent, and behavior, unlike paint, doesn't change as easily. The driver didn't force. Not immediately. The driver tested. He hunted with conversation first, with normality as bait. He relied on hesitation, on politeness, on that split second when a person wonders if they are being rude by saying no. That's the kind of predator who thrives in big cities, because big cities teach you to mind your business, to keep moving, to avoid confrontation, and politeness becomes a vulnerability. They traced those old reports back to officers who had taken them, to dispatch logs, to any trace of follow-up. One report, in particular, had a detail that didn't belong in a guess. It was precise, a sticker in the rear window, a unique decal, something the witness remembered because it felt out of place, because it made the car look almost childish. That decal became a hook. Investigators searched old photos, traffic stops, social media posts, anything that might contain a similar window detail. They ran it through image recognition. They cross-referenced parking violations. They found nothing. Then, weeks later, they found one hit, a grainy photo from a roadside incident years earlier. Car pulled over for a minor infraction, the rear window visible for half a second, the decal there like a smirk. The registered owner was not the driver in the photo. That's when the case swerved into the territory where cold cases often die: ownership transfers, borrowed vehicles, family cars, friends who share keys, names that lead to other names, and every step away from the original moment is a step deeper into uncertainty. But detectives kept digging, because the decal was too specific to ignore. They built a web of associations around the vehicle: relatives, roommates, co-workers, anyone with access. And in that web there was a familiar name, the same name that had flickered at the edge of the case for years, the person on the periphery who seemed too normal to be dangerous. He had an ordinary life on paper. That was the problem. Ordinary lives are perfect camouflage. He had employment records, rental history, friends who described him as quiet, helpful, keeps to himself. He had no obvious violent record. He had the kind of face you wouldn't remember after passing on a sidewalk. The kind of person who can stand in a crowd and disappear by being unremarkable. Detectives hate that kind of suspect, because juries like monsters, and ordinary men don't look like monsters. They brought him in again, and this time the interview was different. Not aggressive, not theatrical. Calm, patient, surgical. They asked the same questions as before, but they asked them in new orders, in new tones, with new details slipped in like needles. They watched for micro-reactions, the blink that comes a bit too late, the swallow when a specific street name is mentioned, the sudden over-explanation that sounds like someone building a wall on the fly. He denied everything. He insisted he barely knew her. He said he was home. He said he was asleep. He said he didn't even remember that night. And then, when they mentioned the decal, he laughed, small and tight, like it was absurd that anyone cared about something so trivial. Trivial details are never trivial in homicide rooms. Trivial details are where liars trip. They didn't arrest him. They didn't have enough. But they did something else, something quieter, and quiet moves are often the ones that matter. They followed him. Not like in movies, with obvious tails and dramatic stakeouts. They followed his data. They looked at his phone movements, his spending patterns, his online behavior. They watched for the kind of anxiety that leaks out when someone realizes the past is walking toward them again. People who have nothing to hide don't suddenly change routines. People who are being squeezed by time do. He bought a new phone. He stopped using certain apps. He traveled out of the city for short periods and didn't tell anyone. He started throwing away trash in different places. Small things, but small things are how guilt breathes. And then the leak happened. Not a headline this time, not a dramatic, solved, but a whisper that moved through the city's underground channels. Police were closing in. Someone had been identified. A search warrant was coming. This whisper reached the family before it reached the news, and that alone was terrifying, because it meant information was moving outside official control. It meant someone inside knew, and someone outside knew, and in between those 2 points the truth was being carried by human mouths, messy, fallible, hungry for impact. The family's phones lit up again. Messages. Calls. Strangers asking if they'd heard the good news. The family learned to hear that phrase as a threat. Good news was the bait that had hooked them before. Good news was the thing that turned into nothing. But there was a difference now. There was movement behind the silence. Vehicles outside a certain address at odd hours. A marked car parked down the street with its lights off. People in plain clothes walking up to a door and leaving without knocking, as if they were measuring something, as if they were waiting for the right moment. Neighbors noticed. Neighbors talked. In Toronto, neighborhoods are quiet until they are not, and then they become ecosystems of rumor. One morning, someone reported seeing officers carrying boxes out of a garage. Another said they saw a carpet rolled tight like a body. Another swore they heard shouting through the walls at night, a man's voice cracking, a woman crying, the kind of domestic noise that is common enough to ignore until you realize ignoring is how monsters survive. None of it was confirmed. All of it spread. The case fed on it. Detectives obtained a warrant, and warrants are paperwork dressed as power. They searched a property connected to him, not necessarily his home, not necessarily a place anyone would expect, a storage unit, an old family cottage, a garage rented under another name. Places where time collects dust. Places where secrets can sit untouched for years. The search lasted hours. When it ended, the officers left carrying sealed bags. They did not announce what was inside. The city waited for the headline. The family waited for the call. And then, instead of closure, they got another kind of horror, the statement. Investigation ongoing. No solved. No arrest. No names. Just those two words, the ones that mean everything and nothing. The ones that keep you alive and keep you trapped. The ones that let the public move on while the family remains suspended in a slow, relentless fall. And in that fall, a darker question began to take shape, one that made even seasoned detectives uneasy. What if the 2024 solved headline wasn't premature optimism, but an intentional distraction? What if it was released to flush someone out, to make a suspect react, to force movement? What if the lie was part of the strategy? If that was true, then the family had been used as bait, and bait bleeds. The ethical line in cold cases is thin as ice. The public wants results. The police want convictions. The media wants spectacle. Families want truth. And in the middle, someone who knows what happened watches and calculates. Because every move by investigators is also information to the suspect. Every press statement is a weather report for someone hiding in plain sight. If the suspect believes they are safe, they relax. If they believe they are about to be exposed, they act, and action produces evidence. So maybe the lie wasn't meant for Toronto. Maybe it was meant for one person. And if it was meant for one person, then somewhere in the city or beyond it, a man heard, solved, and felt his stomach drop, felt old memories claw at his ribs, felt the past rise like floodwater, and in that moment he either ran, or he buried something deeper, or he called someone he shouldn't have called, or he made a mistake that finally produced the crack investigators needed. Or he didn't. And that possibility, no mistake, no confession, no slip, was the worst of all, because it meant the person responsible had learned how to survive the most dangerous thing a criminal can face, time. The mistake everyone makes about time is thinking it only erodes, that years soften edges and loosen grip, that memory fades and guilt dissolves, but time can sharpen too, it can calcify, it can turn a secret into a second skeleton inside a person, and when investigators squeezed the case in 2025 and watched the city flinch in response, they weren't just chasing evidence, they were watching for stress fractures, because stress reveals structure, and in the structure of this case there were strange reinforcements, places where the narrative held too tight, where someone, somewhere, had been maintaining the lie like a building you keep repainting so no one notices the cracks. That maintenance showed up in the smallest ways first, the kind of ways that feel like coincidence until they don't, an anonymous tip that arrived moments after a reporter asked the wrong question, a social media account that resurfaced with a fresh rumor just as investigators revisited an old witness, a sudden flood of false sightings that pulled attention toward the same dead-end neighborhood, like someone was ringing a bell to make the crowd stampede in the wrong direction. Detectives began to treat misinformation not as background noise but as a footprint, because purposeful noise has a signature too. Random lies scatter. Strategic lies cluster. And the clusters kept forming around the same themes: water, ravines, a certain industrial stretch near the lake, the same kind of terrain that makes a city feel like it has hidden rooms. They went back to the terrain anyway, because strategic lies often orbit real fear. They walked the shoreline in daylight when it looked harmless and in darkness when it looked like a mouth. They checked the service roads, the access gates, the narrow paths where snow turns to black slush and footsteps vanish in minutes. They brought in search teams with tools that didn't exist in 2014, methods refined by disasters and wars and other people's missing loved ones, ground scans, sonar sweeps, drones that could see patterns in brush, dogs trained to detect the chemistry of death even when death has been sleeping for years. None of that guarantees anything, because nature is a perfect accomplice. Lake Ontario eats evidence. Ravines bury it. Freeze-thaw cycles grind it down. Construction covers it. Toronto is always building, always pouring concrete, always sealing the past under new foundations. They found things. They always find things when they look hard enough. Old clothing dumped by someone careless. Animal remains. Scrap. Bags of trash that never should have been there. The city's hidden refuse. Every discovery forced a pause, a lab test, a careful step, and every negative result was its own kind of grief, because you begin to realize how many stories exist beneath your feet that will never make headlines, how many people have vanished and turned into statistics, how many families are still listening to the same dead phone line. But the case didn't truly pivot on terrain. It pivoted on a person, because somewhere between the old decal lead and the new data extractions, the investigators had started to build a picture not just of what might have happened, but of what someone would have needed to do afterward to keep it hidden, and the afterward is where most criminals fail. They panic. They brag. They confess to the wrong person. They keep a trophy. They return to the scene. They drink too much and talk too loud. They move the body too many times. They leave a transaction trail. The afterward is messy. The afterward creates evidence. In this case, the afterward was unnervingly quiet. That quiet suggested discipline, and discipline suggests either experience or help. And help is the nightmare scenario in any cold case, because one predator is dangerous, but a network is a machine. Help means the truth isn't contained inside one skull, it's distributed. Help means someone else knows, someone else has been protecting the secret, someone else benefits from silence. Help means even if you catch the primary actor, the story still bleeds out into other lives. So detectives widened their lens again, away from the suspect at the edge and toward his orbit. They looked at friendships, family, co-workers, the people who had access to his vehicles, his keys, his time. They asked a brutal question: who could cover for him without realizing they were covering? Who could have offered an alibi as a favor? Who could have stored something, just for a while, and then forgotten? Who could have heard a confession and misinterpreted it as a joke, a rant, a drunken exaggeration? Because that's how complicity often begins, not with evil intent, but with denial. People don't want to believe monsters sit at their tables. A former co-worker came forward after the 2024 headline fiasco, a person who said they'd always held back because they didn't want to be dragged into the spotlight, because they didn't want their own life turned into evidence. That fear is real. True crime culture eats witnesses alive. The internet doxes. Strangers harass. Jobs fire. Relationships fracture. People who speak become characters in a story they can't control. So when the co-worker finally spoke, it wasn't with cinematic confidence. It was with a trembling anger, as if they were furious at themselves for waiting so long. They said the suspect, if it was him, had come to work in the days after the disappearance with an energy that didn't match the environment, too calm, too focused, the kind of calm you see in people who have already processed something terrible because they were the ones who did it. They said he'd made a comment, offhand, almost casual, about how the city will forget. He'd laughed when others talked about the missing woman. Not a loud laugh. A private one. The kind that suggests an internal joke. The co-worker admitted they'd brushed it off at the time because people say weird things, because dark humor is common, because accusing someone is heavier than most people can carry. But after 10 years, the comment felt like a fingerprint. Investigators didn't treat it as proof. They treated it as leverage. They brought the suspect back in again. Another interview. Another room. Another set of calm voices. They didn't accuse outright. They presented pieces, not all of them, just enough to make him feel the walls shift. The decal. The old roadside photo. The altered phone habits. The searches. The storage unit. The co-worker's memory. Each piece dropped like a coin on a table. Clink. 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 Not loud, but relentless. He stayed composed at first. The kind of composed that reads as innocence if you want to believe in innocence. He denied. He shrugged. He offered explanations with practiced ease. The decal wasn't his. The car wasn't his. He didn't remember. People lie about him. Everyone lies. Then they shifted tactics, because this isn't about shouting. It's about destabilizing. They spoke about the family. They spoke about the years. They spoke about how cases don't die anymore, how technology keeps pulling the past forward, how secrets rot and seep no matter how carefully you seal them. They watched his face. They watched for the moment the mask slipped. The slip, when it came, wasn't tears or rage. It was irritation. A flash of contempt. A quick tightening at the corner of the mouth as if he was offended by their persistence, as if their insistence on truth was an inconvenience. Contempt is revealing. Innocent people are afraid. Guilty people are often annoyed. They ended the interview without arrest. Another round of waiting. Another round of silence. And in that silence, something else happened, something that didn't feel like police procedure at all. It felt like a message. A new voicemail appeared in the family's inbox. Not from her number. Not from any known number. Just a voice, distorted, brief, and empty of words. A sound like breathing. A faint scrape like fabric against a microphone. Then a click. It could have been a prank. It could have been nothing. But the timing was surgical. It landed days after the interview, days after the rumor of the 2024 solved headline flared again online, days after the storage unit search was whispered about in the neighborhood. It was too perfect to ignore and too vague to trust. And that's the cruelty of psychological warfare. It doesn't need to be true to be effective. It only needs to reach the right nerves. The family gave it to police immediately. Audio specialists analyzed it. They found no clear trace that could lead to a sender, no easy digital breadcrumbs. But they did find something that made the room colder. The recording contained background ambience that matched the earlier rumored voicemail's acoustic profile. Similar noise floor. Similar open space resonance. Similar low-frequency vibration. It wasn't a match that could be presented as certainty, not yet, but it was enough to raise a terrifying possibility. Someone was mimicking the original artifact, reproducing it, echoing it, as if the voicemail itself had become a weapon. If the suspect heard about the rumor and wanted to torment the family, he could do this. If someone else was involved and felt pressure tightening, they could do this. If a random sadist wanted attention, they could do this. The identity didn't matter at first. The effect did. The effect was a spike of pain that forced the case back into the city's mouth, forced the family to relive the first night, forced everyone to look again at the empty space where a life should be. And that's when the investigators made a move that felt like stepping onto thin ice with full knowledge that it might crack. They quietly coordinated with media to release a controlled fragment of information, not everything, not enough to compromise the case, but enough to bait a response. A detail about the car. A hint about the decal. A mention of new forensic developments. The public consumed it instantly. Comment sections ignited. Armchair detectives drew maps. The story trendlined for 2 days, then began to sink because outrage has a short shelf life. But the suspect's behavior didn't sink. It shifted again. His phone went dark for hours at a time. He made unannounced trips outside the city, returning at odd hours. He visited a hardware store and bought items that could be innocent, plastic sheeting, gloves, heavy-duty bags, or could be the shopping list of someone who had learned to clean. He disposed of garbage in public bins instead of his own. He scrubbed his vehicle interior, an act that might seem normal until you realize he'd owned the car for years without ever being known to clean it. He was reacting to pressure. The question was why. Detectives obtained another warrant. This one was broader. It included digital extraction from devices, financial audits, and, most crucially, permission to search a property linked to someone in his orbit, someone who had always seemed irrelevant until patterns made them unavoidable. A relative's place. A friend's garage. A storage space rented under a different name. These are the places where the afterward hides. These are the places where people stash what they can't keep at home, the evidence, the trophies, the tools, the memories they pretend they don't have. They searched. They catalogued. They removed boxes. And then something leaked, again, not officially, but with the unmistakable taste of insider information. Something had been found that changed everything. The city inhaled. The family's phones exploded. Reporters camped outside precinct buildings like vultures waiting for a body to drop. The phrase, "cold case solved," started to creep back into the air, toxic and tempting. But no arrest came. Instead, a quiet legal battle began behind closed doors, the kind the public rarely sees: motions, warrants challenged, evidence contested, timelines argued. Because when investigators finally find something after years, the defense doesn't just fight the facts, it fights the process. One mistake in procedure can turn a breakthrough into dust. One misstep can hand the truth back to the person who buried it. And whoever the suspect was, he had counsel now, the kind of counsel that moves quickly, the kind of counsel that knows how to freeze momentum. The case entered that brutal limbo where everyone knows something is happening but no one can say what. The family could feel it in the way detectives spoke, careful, clipped, exhausted. The detectives could feel it in the way the suspect walked, a little straighter, a little more guarded, like someone who senses the net tightening but still believes he can slip through. The public could feel it in the way the story hovered, refusing to die, refusing to conclude. And in the middle of all of it, the missing woman remained absent, the most important piece still missing, because without her, everything is theory and inference and probability. Without her, there is no final scene. Without her, the case cannot truly end, because the city can accept a guilty verdict, but families need more than verdicts. Families need to know where the body is. They need to know what happened in the last seconds. They need to know if there was fear, if there was pain, if there was a moment of hope that turned into nothing. The investigators understood that. That's why they kept chasing not just a suspect, but a location. They believed, quietly, cautiously, that if someone had kept this secret for so long, they had either moved the truth multiple times or hidden it somewhere they felt untouchable, somewhere psychologically significant, near a childhood place, a familiar route, a property connected to family, a place that wasn't chosen randomly but chosen because it felt like a vault. And vaults can be opened, but only if you find the key. The most chilling thought was that the key might not be evidence at all. It might be a person. Someone who has been holding the other half of the story in their throat for a decade. Someone who has been watching headlines, watching police cars, watching the family's pain, and waiting for the moment to decide which side of history they want to die on. Because that's what unsolved cases do, they turn ordinary people into potential accomplices, potential saviors, potential liars. They force you to look at your neighbors and wonder what they've overheard, what they've buried, what they've chosen not to say. And if that person exists, if the second voice on that old voicemail belongs to someone still alive, then every day the case remains unsolved is not just a failure of investigation. It's a decision being renewed. A silence being maintained. A secret being fed. And Toronto, for all its noise, knows exactly how loud a maintained silence can be. The key, they realized, wasn't going to be found in a lab report or a surveillance frame you could pause and circle with a red marker, because the case had already survived the era of sloppy mistakes and easy confessions. It had survived the first wave of outrage, the second wave of technology, the third wave of rumors, and what survives that long is not just hidden, it's protected, it's cushioned by choices, by habits, by people who prefer the world as it is to the world as it should be, and when a secret becomes a lifestyle, it doesn't crack from logic, it cracks from pressure in the wrong place at the wrong time, a pressure you can't predict because it comes from the human parts, the messy parts, the parts that don't behave like evidence. Pressure arrived one evening in the form of a traffic stop. Not cinematic. Not a chase. Just blue lights in a rearview mirror, routine pullover on a cold street where the asphalt looked wet even when it wasn't. The officer approached. The driver rolled down the window. The officer asked for license and registration. The driver complied. And then something happened that turned a normal interaction into a ripple through a decade. The officer noticed the decal. Small. Faded. Nearly peeled away at the edges, like it had been scraped up with a fingernail and then abandoned. The same childish-looking sticker that witnesses had described years earlier, the same one investigators had turned into a hook and then lost in the weeds, the same one that now, in the beam of a flashlight, looked like a joke that refused to die. The officer didn't know the case. Most officers don't carry every missing person file in their heads. But the decal looked odd enough that he mentioned it in the notes anyway, a throwaway detail, the kind paperwork eats and forgets. Except this time, the notes weren't forgotten. The notes landed in the wrong place at the right time, flagged by a system that had been trained, finally, to stop ignoring the trivial. That's the thing about cold cases, they don't always break open with a confession. Sometimes they break open with bureaucracy. A detective saw the entry. A glance. A pause. A call. Another call. Suddenly the traffic stop wasn't routine anymore. It became a needle in a haystack, and someone realized they'd just watched the needle move. They didn't move fast in public. They moved fast in private. Because the first rule of catching a person who has survived this long is you don't let them smell the net until it's already closed. They tracked the vehicle discreetly, the owner's name, the addresses associated, the insurance record, the service history. They cross-referenced with old databases that had been cleaned and reorganized since 2014. They pulled photos from old parking enforcement snapshots, the kind no one thinks matter. They found the decal again in the background of a photo taken years earlier outside a building near her workplace. And with that connection, the case tightened like a knot. But knots don't prove anything. They only restrict movement. The suspect, if he was the suspect, had felt restriction already. He'd been changing habits. He'd been shedding routine. And shedding routine is a confession without words, because routine is what innocent people cling to when life gets stressful. Guilty people start pruning. They start removing branches where evidence might have lodged. They start living like they're being watched, even when they aren't. They start scanning reflections in storefront glass, walking with a different posture, speaking with a different caution. Their world shrinks down to threat management. Then the city gave him a new threat he couldn't manage, someone close to him died. It happens like that sometimes. A heart attack. An accident. An overdose. The universe doesn't wait for investigations. It keeps throwing events into the mix, and those events jolt the people involved. Grief loosens tongues. Funerals gather witnesses in one place. Families talk. Old stories resurface because death drags the past into the room whether you invite it or not. Suddenly, the orbit around the suspect shifted. People who hadn't spoken to each other in years stood shoulder to shoulder over a coffin, and in those tight clusters, secrets have a habit of slipping out like smoke. A relative, shaken and raw, said something after the service, something that sounded like nothing to anyone else but sounded like a gunshot to an investigator who happened to be listening through the right channel. A phrase about that night. A mention of the car. A complaint about how you never told me where you went. It wasn't a confession. It was a fracture. And fractures are how you see what's inside. Police approached the relative carefully. Not with uniforms and threats. With calm. With time. With the kind of empathy that feels like a trap because it is. They asked about family history. About cars. About late nights. About tension. About the things that make families build walls inside their own homes. The relative resisted at first. People always do. Loyalty is a powerful drug. Denial is even stronger. But grief makes people desperate to find meaning, and meaning in death often leads back to old mysteries. The relative eventually admitted there had been arguments in 2014, strange ones. Late-night phone calls. A sudden obsession with news coverage. A burst of anger whenever the missing woman's name came up on TV. And once, a comment said under breath in a kitchen, "They'll never find her." they'll never find her. Not, they'll never find the truth. Not, they'll never solve it. Her. The person. The body. The exact thing the family needed most. The relatives said they'd try to ignore it, try to interpret it as dark humor, try to scrub it from memory because accepting it would mean accepting they lived with someone capable of something unforgivable. But it didn't scrub out. It stuck. It came back in dreams. It came back when police cars passed. It came back when the 2024 solved headline hit the news and everyone in the family looked at each other in sudden, terrified silence, because that headline didn't just promise closure, it threatened exposure. That's what the headline did, whether it was intended or not. It forced reactions. It made people show their hands. Investigators didn't rush. They documented. They verified. They asked the relative to repeat details, then repeat them again months later to see what stayed consistent. They compared the relative's account to old statements. They found overlaps that hadn't been visible before. The argument timeline matched the suspect's known movements. The late-night phone calls corresponded to gaps in cell tower data. The obsession with news coverage matched spikes in his internet searches. None of it was a smoking gun. But it was smoke in a room that had been too clean for too long. So they went back to digital life, because digital life is where habits betray you. They took what they could legally take, device histories, cloud backups, deleted messages retrieved through forensics, location data saved in apps you forgot existed. They looked at 2014 first, because criminals are sloppy at the beginning. They don't realize how durable data is. They don't realize the future will come with better tools. They don't realize a forgotten backup can become a confession 10 years later. In those archives, investigators found something that made them stop speaking for a moment, as if words might contaminate it, a draft message. Not sent. Not delivered. Just typed and abandoned. It wasn't a confession written in blood. It wasn't a diary entry. It was shorter than that, colder than that, the kind of phrase someone types when panic spikes and the mind starts racing toward contingency, if they ask, and then the text cut off. Another draft, days later, I was nowhere near, cut off. Another, delete this. And if you don't know what you're looking at, those fragments could be anything. But in context, in a decade-long investigation, drafts are tremors. Drafts are the mind rehearsing lies before the mouth is forced to speak. Then they found a search query from that same period: how long does a body take? People can search morbid things out of curiosity. True. People can fall down dark rabbit holes at 2 a.m. True. But when a search like that appears in the exact window of a disappearance, in the digital life of a person connected by vehicle and behavior and fractures, curiosity begins to look like rehearsal. The suspect's counsel would call it coincidence. Detectives called it motive to dig deeper. They wanted the location. The vault. The place the truth had been sealed. And that's when they returned to the water. Not because water is romantic. Because water is practical. Water hides. Water destroys. Water intimidates. Toronto's shoreline is not just beaches and boardwalks. It's industrial corridors, storm drains, culverts, service tunnels, places where a person can vanish without ever leaving the city. Places where the lake and the city shake hands in darkness. Investigators mapped the suspect's known routes, work commutes, family visits, favorite bars, late-night drives that could be tracked through old toll records or gas station receipts or the location metadata on forgotten photos. They overlaid those routes with the geography of concealment, ravines, access points, construction sites active in 2014, areas where concrete was poured soon after. They searched for overlaps. And the overlaps clustered in one zone, a stretch near the lake where industry and emptiness intersected, a place that didn't draw casual foot traffic, a place that, in 2014, had been undergoing changes, fences moved, lots cleared, ground disturbed. Perfect conditions for a secret to be buried and then forgotten under progress. They didn't arrive with a circus. They arrived like a whisper. Unmarked vehicles. Teams in plain clothes. A few specialists with equipment that looked like it belonged to another world. The kind of operation that tells you something is happening even if no one says it out loud. The family wasn't informed at first. Families are often the last to know because hope can sabotage, because grief can leak, because the wrong word to the wrong person can ruin everything. That's the cruelty of procedure. It protects the case by hurting the people who live inside it. The search began at dawn. The lake looked flat. The wind was sharp enough to cut. The city's skyline watched from a distance, gleaming and indifferent. Technicians moved slowly, scanning, marking, rescanning. Dogs worked with their noses close to the ground, bodies tense, tails stiff with focus. Every time a dog paused too long, every time a handler tightened their grip, hearts jumped. But hours passed. Then more. The teams dug in a few places, pulled up earth, tested, bagged, labeled. Nothing definitive emerged. Not yet. By late afternoon, the operation shifted 100 meters, then another 100. It felt like circling. Like approaching something in widening spirals. And then one dog stopped in a way that was different. Not curiosity. Not distraction. Certainty. The handler froze. The technicians converged. The air changed. Even the wind felt like it held its breath. They dug carefully. No shovels at first. Smaller tools. Slow scraping. Layers. Dirt packed hard as regret. And then, something unnatural. A texture that didn't belong. A piece of material, degraded but distinct, caught beneath soil that had been compressed for years. The team didn't cheer. They didn't speak. They photographed. They measured. They tagged. Because in that moment, the case wasn't a headline. It was a grave possibility. Word leaked anyway. It always does. Someone saw. Someone posted. A reporter with a police source sent a message. The city's true crime channels lit up like Christmas. They found something. It's happening. This is it. The phrase, "cold case solved," crept back into the air like a ghost trying to reclaim its lie. And once again, the family's phone rang with strangers asking for closure they didn't own. Investigators still didn't arrest anyone. They couldn't. Not until the lab spoke. Not until the material became evidence and not just a story. Not until they knew what they were holding. Because if they pulled the trigger too early and the find turned out to be unrelated, they would destroy what little trust remained. And trust, in this case, was already hanging by threads. So the city waited with its breath trapped in its chest, the family waited with their hands shaking around phones that never brought the right call, and somewhere, the suspect, if he was the suspect, waited too, watching the shoreline on the news, watching the footage of technicians and tape, and feeling something inside him either collapse or harden, because when the ground starts giving up what you buried, there are only two kinds of people left in the world, the ones who can't survive the truth, and the ones who will do anything to keep it from surfacing. The lab is a place where emotion goes to die on stainless steel, where hope is reduced to fibers and numbers, where every human story gets translated into thresholds and probabilities, and when the sealed bags from the shoreline reached that cold light, Toronto's breath stayed trapped, because everyone knew the difference between something and the thing is a microscope, and microscopes take their time. The technicians pulled on gloves like surgeons. They documented every angle like they were photographing a planet. They separated material from soil, soil from roots, roots from the tiny artifacts that cling to them like parasites. They searched for biological traces, for the chemistry that says a person was here, for the signature of decomposition that dogs can smell but juries demand in ink. And while the machines worked, the city filled the silence with its own soundtrack, podcasts spinning theories, commenters sharpening their knives, strangers pronouncing guilt with the confidence of people who will never have to prove it. The first report came back the way first reports often do, inconclusive. Not, no, not, yes. A limbo word, a shrug disguised as science. The material recovered wasn't a body. Not bones. Not the clean confirmation the public craved. It was fabric, degraded, stained, possibly old enough to be anything. A scrap that could have belonged to a worksite, to a dumped bag of trash, to a homeless encampment, to 1,000 mundane narratives. But there were trace elements, microscopic residues, faint biological markers, enough to keep the case moving, enough to justify deeper testing, enough to make the family's stomachs twist because enough is the most dangerous amount of hope you can be given. Investigators didn't talk. They couldn't. Silence was strategy now, not absence, because every word could ripple into the suspect's world. They had learned, painfully, that this case breathed when it was watched. The moment the city's eyes turned toward it, the noise spiked, the false tips flooded, the anonymous calls came in like rain. So the detectives tightened their circle. Fewer people briefed. More sealed documents. More meetings behind closed doors where names were spoken softly and then buried in paperwork. They didn't want another "solved" headline. They didn't want another lie to weaponize the family's grief. They wanted one thing, leverage strong enough to crack a mouth that had stayed shut for a decade. The suspect, if he was the suspect, didn't stay shut, not entirely. He couldn't. People think guilt is a silent thing, but guilt leaks. It leaks in routine. In spending. In movement. In the way someone's eyes track a police cruiser longer than they should. After the shoreline search became public, he changed again. He stopped going to certain places. He took longer routes home. He began using cash more often, as if he remembered, too late, that digital trails last forever. He told people he was thinking of moving, a casual sentence that sounded like normal life until you understood what moving means in a case like this. It means running without running, it means relocation as camouflage, it means trying to outpace a past that has already learned how to follow. His counsel did what counsel always does, controlled contact, controlled statements, controlled posture. My client denies any involvement. There is no evidence linking him. Rumors are irresponsible. The words were clean, polished, built to survive headlines. But behind clean words, something else was happening, a quiet legal resistance, motions filed, warrants challenged, requests for disclosure. The defense wasn't just preparing for a trial that might never come, it was trying to slow the investigation down, because cold cases thrive on momentum, and momentum is fragile. Break the rhythm and the team loses energy. Witnesses drift. Media moves on. The public forgets again. Delay is a weapon. So detectives fought delay with pressure. Not with announcements. With doors. They went back to the people around him, the orbit. Friends. Ex-partners. Relatives. Co-workers. They didn't ask, did he do it? They asked smaller questions, because small questions are harder to prepare for. Did he ever mention her name? Did he ever talk about that neighborhood? Did he ever come home with scratches? Did he ever suddenly clean his car in 2014? Did he ever ask you to store something? Did he ever disappear for a night and offer a strange explanation? They asked until people got tired, because tired people stop performing. They asked until contradictions appeared, because contradictions are cracks you can widen. A friend, someone who had known him long enough to speak with that dangerous mix of loyalty and resentment, admitted that in the months after 2014 the suspect had become strangely vigilant about his phone. He'd started putting it face down. He'd started deleting messages. He'd started talking about privacy like it was a religion. And once, after a few drinks, he'd said something that had sounded like bragging and fear stitched together: they can't prove anything without a body. He laughed afterward, a laugh that landed wrong in the room, the kind that makes other men glance at each other and then glance away because acknowledging it would mean stepping into darkness. They can't prove anything without a body. That sentence is a map. It tells you what a person believes is protecting them. It tells you what they are watching for. It tells you what they've built their survival on. It doesn't prove guilt on its own, but it reveals a mindset, and investigators love mindsets, because mindsets predict behavior. If he believed the absence of a body was his armor, then every move he made afterward would be designed to preserve that absence. He would avoid places that could be searched. He would monitor news for new technology. He would react violently to any hint that remains might be found. He would treat the missing woman's physical absence like a locked vault, and if the vault was threatened, he might do something desperate. Desperation arrived in the form of a fire. Not a dramatic inferno. A small one. Contained. The kind that gets dismissed as an accident. A trash bin behind a property associated with someone in his orbit went up in the middle of the night. Neighbors smelled it. Someone called it in. Firefighters arrived and extinguished it quickly. By morning, the story was gone, swallowed by the city's daily noise. But investigators noticed. Because the bin wasn't just any bin. It was near the place they'd searched earlier. Near the place they'd removed sealed bags from. Near the place the whispers said changed everything. They treated the fire as a message, or a cleanup, or both. They pulled what they could from the char, melted plastic, ash, fragments of paper that crumbled when touched. In most cases, a small fire is nothing. In this case, nothing was allowed to be nothing. They asked firefighters what it looked like. They asked whether it smelled like gasoline. They asked whether anyone had been seen nearby. They collected security footage from surrounding buildings, the kind that sees everything but rarely sees clearly. In one clip, a figure crossed a lot at 2:13 a.m., face obscured, gait steady, carrying something that could have been a bag, or nothing at all. The footage didn't give them a name. It gave them a direction. The family learned about the fire the way they learned about everything now, in fragments, through half-truths, through calls that began with long pauses, through the heavy careful tone detectives use when they are trying not to hurt you but have to anyway. The family's lives had become a series of almosts. Almost a suspect. Almost a location. Almost evidence. Almost closure. And almost is a poison that accumulates, because it makes you wonder if the universe is teasing you, if someone is controlling the story for sport, if your grief is a puppet on strings pulled by hands you can't see. That's why the second voicemail mattered so much. Not because it contained words, but because it contained intent. It was intrusion. It was someone stepping into the family's space. An intrusion is either a prank or a power move. Police believed it was a power move. They believed the person behind it wanted to remind the family, and the investigators, that the case was still under someone else's control. That belief changed the way they treated every piece of noise. They started mapping harassment. They traced timing, not to identify the caller, too many masks, too many spoofing tools, but to identify the rhythm of the person who made the call. People repeat themselves. Even when they hide, they repeat. The rhythm suggested a pattern, spikes in taunting behavior after investigative pressure, after interviews, after searches. Like a reflex. Like someone scratching a wound whenever it starts to heal. If the suspect was behind it, it meant he was watching the investigation closely. If someone else was behind it, it meant involvement went wider than they'd feared. Either way, the taunting was an error, because errors create opportunities. Every interaction leaves a trace somewhere. A ping. A log. A slip in operational security. A single moment when the person forgets the world is a net. Detectives set a trap. Not an obvious one. A trap built of psychology. They leaked, carefully, through channels they could monitor, that the lab had confirmed something significant from the shoreline search, something that would force an arrest. They didn't name the suspect. They didn't name the evidence. They let the rumor breathe, because rumors, in this case, were not just noise. They were bait. Within 48 hours, the suspect made a call to a number that had not appeared in his records for years. A number belonging to someone who had moved, changed jobs, stayed quiet, someone in his orbit who had always seemed irrelevant. The call was brief. Then another call. Then a text. Deleted quickly afterward. But deleted doesn't mean gone. It means you were scared enough to try. Investigators obtained the records through a warrant that had been waiting for a reason to exist. They read the message, recovered from the digital sediment like bones from dirt. It wasn't a confession. It was worse in a way, because it revealed coordination, don't talk. They are bluffing. Don't talk. That phrase is a hand on a mouth. It's control. It's fear management. It's someone trying to keep a story sealed. And stories only need sealing when what's inside is dangerous. They moved again, quietly, to that other person's door. The person answered, confused, pale, caught in the sudden glare of a case they'd spent years pushing to the edge of their life. They insisted they knew nothing. They insisted the suspect was paranoid. They insisted the message was about unrelated drama. But when detectives mentioned the shoreline search, the person's posture changed. Not dramatically, just enough. A tightening. A blink. A moment where their eyes slid away from direct contact. And in that tiny moment, investigators saw what they needed to see, not guilt, perhaps, but knowledge. Knowledge that had been held down for years by loyalty or fear. They didn't arrest the person. They didn't threaten. They offered an exit. Because that's what good interrogators do in cases like this. They offer you a door and make it feel like the only door that leads away from ruin. They spoke about obstruction. About accessory after the fact. About how the world treats people who protect monsters. About how the truth comes out eventually, and when it does, the people who helped are swallowed with it. They spoke about the family's decade of waiting. They spoke about the missing woman as if she was still a person, not a case file, and the person at the door flinched like the name had teeth. They asked one question, soft as a blade: where would he go? The person hesitated, and that hesitation was a storm, because people who know nothing don't hesitate that way. People who are lying hesitate, yes, but they hesitate with calculation. This hesitation was different. It was grief and fear tangled together. The person swallowed. They said, "You used to go to the lake when he got angry." A pause. "There's a place. An old access road." He said it was quiet. He said nobody goes there. A place. An access road. Quiet. Detectives didn't react in front of the person. They took the information like it was ordinary and walked away with their hearts punching at their ribs. Because in cold cases, quiet places, are where bodies sleep. They drove there later, not with sirens, but with the slow deliberate movement of people walking toward a possibility they feared for years. The access road was exactly what the city's geography loves to hide, a narrow strip of asphalt broken by potholes, bordered by weeds and chain link, leading to a dead end near water where wind and distance swallow sound. It felt abandoned, but it wasn't. There were tire marks. Recent. Fresh enough to make the air feel colder. Someone had been there. They didn't find her. Not then. They found signs of disturbance, earth that had been turned, a patch of ground that didn't match the surrounding texture, as if something had been dug and refilled. They marked it. They photographed it. They waited for specialists. And while they waited, the lake kept moving, indifferent, the city skyline shimmering like a mirage, and the case hovered on the edge of becoming something else, a case with a place with a story that might finally have an ending. But endings are treacherous in this case. Every time the world leaned toward closure, something yanked it back. The lab. The fire. The voicemails. The controlled leak. The message, "Don't talk." And now, a fresh patch of disturbed ground by a quiet access road, with fresh tire marks that suggested someone was still tending the secret, still maintaining the lie, still moving pieces on the board as if the board belonged to them. Which meant one thing, and it hit like a pulse of electricity through everyone connected to the case: the person responsible might not just be a ghost of 2014. He might be present. Active. Watching. And if he was still watching, then every step investigators took toward that disturbed earth was not just a search for truth. It was a confrontation with a living predator who had already proven he could survive a decade of pressure, and might be ready, now, to do something far more dangerous than hide. Night fell early over the lake, and the access road felt like a secret even to the people standing on it, a strip of broken asphalt where the city's lights looked distant and unreal, where the wind carried a chemical taste from nearby industry and the water moved with the slow confidence of something that has swallowed plenty before, and as the tape went up and the unmarked cars settled into place, nobody said the obvious out loud: if those tire marks were fresh, then the past wasn't just being investigated, it was being visited, and whoever had been here had either come to check their work or come to change it. They waited for daylight because daylight is procedure, daylight is safety, daylight makes witnesses and juries and judges less nervous, but waiting didn't feel passive, it felt like holding a lid down on boiling water, every minute stretching tighter, and through that tension the detectives ran their quiet calculations, the kind they never put on paper because paper leaks. If the suspect realized they'd found this place, he'd have a narrow window to respond. He could flee. He could destroy evidence. He could try to silence whoever had spoken. Or he could do something more dangerous, something bold enough to reset the board. The question wasn't whether he would react. The question was what his reaction would cost. At dawn the specialists arrived, not with drama but with tools that looked like they belonged to a different reality: ground-penetrating radar rigs, soil probes, bags of flags, measurement tape, cameras, evidence markers, and a quiet focus that made even hardened officers speak in whispers. The first step wasn't digging. The first step was listening to the earth, because disturbed soil has a language, and machines can read it better than human eyes. They moved in grids. They scanned, marked, rescanned. The radar painted invisible pictures, density shifts, voids, anomalies that could be tree roots or rocks or garbage or something else. The dog team worked beside them, noses low, bodies taut, and when one dog paused at the edge of the disturbed patch and let out a soft, unmistakable signal, the air seemed to tighten around everyone's throats. Still, no one celebrated. In a case like this, celebration is a superstition you don't trust. They marked the spot. They photographed it from every angle. They recorded coordinates. They measured distances from fixed points, fence posts, utility poles, a crack in the asphalt, because if this became evidence, every centimeter would matter, every centimeter would be argued by defense counsel with the cold precision of people paid to doubt. The first soil core came up dark and wet, smelling of rotten lake air. The second came up lighter, drier, wrong for the surrounding area, as if it had been mixed and replaced. They laid the samples out like clues on a table. They tested for chemical indicators, for decomposition byproducts that linger long after flesh is gone. The readings were not definitive, not the cinematic hit people imagine, but they were enough to keep going, enough to turn, maybe, into, we have to know. The excavation began with small tools, careful scraping, a slow removal of layers like peeling back years. Dirt fell away. Roots snapped softly. The wind kept moving, indifferent, as if it had no idea this patch of ground was holding a city's breath. They hit something a few inches down, hard, flat, unnatural. A slab? A piece of scrap metal? A discarded board? They cleared around it and revealed plastic, thick sheeting folded over itself like a shroud, compacted and stained. The sight of it made stomachs drop because plastic sheeting is not nature. Plastic sheeting is intention. Plastic sheeting is preparation. Plastic sheeting is someone thinking ahead, someone trying to keep a secret clean. They stopped. They documented. They called in more people. When the sheeting was lifted, the smell rose, faint but distinct, the kind of smell that makes even people who have seen death pause because it isn't just odor, it's history. Beneath it was a smaller bag, then another, the kind sold in hardware stores, black and heavy-duty, tied tight. The team moved like surgeons, cutting carefully, avoiding tears that could destroy fibers, avoiding careless hands that could contaminate. They opened the first bag. It wasn't a body. Not whole. Not the clean ending the public craves. It was something else, clothing, folded or stuffed, degraded by time and moisture, fabric that had once brushed a living person's skin and now lay damp and heavy as if it had absorbed a decade of silence. A second bag contained more, personal items, maybe, or fragments, the kind of fragments that make investigators go quiet because fragments force you to imagine the missing parts. A third bag they didn't open on scene. Some things are too important to expose to wind and lake air. Some things are sealed and transported like fragile truth. When the evidence truck drove away, it felt as if a piece of the case had finally moved from rumor to reality. But reality is not closure. Reality is only weight. The family wasn't told yet, not officially, not directly, because procedures are built to protect prosecutions, not hearts, and detectives have learned the hard way that telling families too soon can turn grief into a headline before a lab can confirm what grief is about. Still, news traveled the way it always does, through whispers, through a neighbor who saw tape, through a photo taken at a distance, through a text from someone who knows someone. By noon, the city's private channels were humming. They found bags. They found something buried. It's her. It's not. It's him. It's someone else. Every claim landed like a stone in the family's chest, each one heavier than the last, because after a decade even hope feels like violence when it arrives uninvited. Investigators moved the evidence to the lab and worked like people who know time is still the enemy. They catalogued every fiber. They swabbed for DNA. They compared fabric patterns to old missing person reports. They looked for unique wear marks, stains, repairs, anything that could link the items to her life, to her last day, to the person who buried them. And beneath all that careful work was one urgent question: if this site had been visited recently, what had changed? Were these bags always here, or had they been moved here after the 2024 headline? Had the suspect relocated evidence to a place he thought was safer? Had he come back to check that it stayed sealed? Or had someone else, an accomplice, a panic protector, come to rearrange the past? To answer that, detectives did what the public rarely thinks of: they investigated the ground itself as a timeline. Soil compaction patterns. Root growth around objects. Moisture gradients. Insect activity. The earth keeps records. If an object has been buried for 10 years, the surrounding environment will embrace it differently than if it's been buried for 10 days. The analysis suggested disturbance. Not just in 2014, but more recently. Enough to make the room go still. Enough to turn the case from old crime to ongoing behavior. That shifted everything, because if evidence had been moved recently, it meant the person responsible was active in the present, not sealed in the past. It meant he was monitoring pressure and responding. It meant he was calculating. And calculating predators are the hardest to catch because they don't just commit a crime, they manage it. The detectives tightened surveillance again, not on the site, but on the suspect and the orbit. They watched his home, his work, his routes. They watched his phone patterns, his credit card usage. They waited for the moment he realized something had changed, because a man who has survived a decade can still crack if the vault he depended on has been breached. That crack might show up as a sudden trip, a rushed purchase, a frantic call. Or it might show up as a calm that is too calm, a false composure that signals internal panic. It showed up as movement at 3 a.m. A camera on a residential street captured him leaving his home, walking with the stiff, purposeful pace of someone who has rehearsed this in his head. He got into his car, drove without headlights for a moment, then turned them on as he merged onto the main road, a small act that felt like habit for someone trying not to be noticed by neighbors. He drove east. The GPS data, obtained later through a warrant, mapped a path that avoided major arteries, avoided toll roads, avoided places with heavy camera coverage. He knew the city's eyes. He had learned where they were. He ended up near another stretch of water, not the same access road, but close enough to feel connected, close enough to suggest a pattern: water as comfort, water as disposal, water as the place you go when the world is tightening. He parked in a dark lot and sat there. For 20 minutes he didn't move. Then he made a call from a second phone, a burner, the kind of device people buy when they believe the only truly safe conversation is one that cannot be traced. But everything can be traced if you build the net wide enough. Investigators had been waiting for the second phone. They had suspected it for months. Now it was speaking. The call went to the person who had hesitated at the door, the one who had finally whispered about the quiet access road. The conversation was short, tense. Not a casual chat. Not a, "How are you?" It had the shape of instructions and fear. When it ended, the suspect threw the phone into the water. People throw phones into water for one reason: they believe water erases. He believed wrong. Divers were sent later, discreetly, in the kind of operation that never makes the evening news. They searched the muddy bottom with magnet sweeps and grid lines. Hours passed. Then a diver surfaced with a small object in a sealed bag. A phone, soaked and dead, but not erased. Not anymore. Modern forensics can pull ghosts from drowned devices. The phone became another sealed promise in an evidence locker. That same day, the person in the suspect's orbit disappeared from their own routines. They didn't show up to work. They didn't answer calls. Their car was gone from the driveway. It could have been coincidence. It could have been panic. It could have been abduction. Any of those possibilities turned the case into a live wire. Detectives sought them urgently, not just because they might know something, but because anyone who knows something in a case like this becomes a target the moment pressure rises. A location ping from their phone appeared briefly on a cell tower near the outskirts. Then nothing. A dead battery, or a turned-off device, or a phone discarded. The silence felt familiar, and that familiarity was sickening. It felt like the first night all over again, the same emptiness, the same unanswered calls, the same dread that this case had claimed another person in the present, not just one in the past. They found the car 2 days later in a grocery store parking lot, parked too neatly, as if someone wanted it to look normal. Inside, nothing obvious. No blood. No signs of struggle. Just small details that made investigators' skin crawl: the seat pushed back farther than the missing person usually drove it, a faint smell of cleaning product, a receipt on the floor dated the morning they vanished, as if someone had stopped for supplies and then stepped off the edge of their life. In the trunk, a shovel, recently washed. The public didn't know any of this yet. The public was still chasing the shoreline bags, still rewriting the story into a neat, solved arc. But investigators weren't living in arcs. They were living in a spiral that kept widening, pulling more people into its center. They now had 2 disappearances tied by rhythm, the woman in 2014 and the orbit person in the present. They had a suspect who moved at night and threw phones into water. They had disturbed Earth. They had evidence bags that suggested careful concealment. They had a map of behavior that didn't belong to an innocent man. So they moved to arrest, but arrests are not just handcuffs. Arrests are timing. Arrest too soon and you lose the chance to find the body. Arrest too late and the suspect runs or kills again. The goal was not just to punish. It was to recover. To locate. To stop the spiral from taking another turn. They brought him in on a smaller charge first, an old warrant, a probation violation, something clean and controllable that allowed them to detain him without revealing the full case. The public would see it as routine. The suspect would feel it as a cage. In the interrogation room, he sat with that practiced calm, the kind of calm that is not peace but armor, the kind of calm that dares you to prove him wrong. He asked for a lawyer immediately. Of course he did. Predators who survive a decade learn the rules. They learn how to hide behind them. But lawyers can't erase physiology. Lawyers can't stop a pulse. Lawyers can't prevent the body from betraying the mind. When detectives mentioned the access road, his eyes flickered. When they mentioned the shoreline bags, his jaw tightened. When they mentioned the drowned phone, he went very still, so still it felt like the room lost oxygen. Then he smiled, small and contemptuous, as if to say, "You're still guessing. You're still chasing. You still don't have what you need." That smile was the most chilling thing in the room, because it was a reminder that even now, even with evidence bags and disturbed Earth and vanished witnesses, the case was still built on missing pieces, and missing pieces are power. As long as she remained unfound, fully, undeniably, he could keep the story suspended. As long as the orbit person remained missing in the present, the spiral could keep spinning into speculation, into uncertainty, into fear. Outside the station, the city went on, ignorant of how close the case had come to transforming from decade-old mystery to active hunt. Streetcars rolled. The lake glittered. People walked dogs. But under that normal life, the case was moving again, Faster now, not like a cold case thawing but like a live crime scene expanding, and the most terrifying thought settled over everyone who had touched the investigation like a shadow. If this man had been maintaining the lie for 10 years, if he had been visiting the vault, moving evidence, silencing people, then the truth was not just buried in soil and water. The truth was walking around in human skin, making choices, taking steps, deciding, right now, what would be allowed to surface and what would be dragged back into the dark.